Welcome back, and today the energy around the Dallas Cowboys feels different, almost like something is quietly unfolding behind the scenes that could shape the entire direction of this franchise heading into the new season. Because right now, it's not just about who they have, it's about who they're choosing not to bring back, who they're hesitating on, and what that tells us about their real strategy. Not the one they're saying publicly, but the one they're actually executing. And that's where things start to get very interesting, especially when you bring names like Jadeveon Clowney, Wagner, Maxx Crosby, and Brandon Aubrey into the conversation, because each one of these situations tells a completely different story about what the Cowboys are trying to build, and more importantly, what they're trying to avoid. Let's start with Clowney, because this one feels like a story that almost wrote itself and then suddenly stopped halfway through, because if you rewind just a little bit, there was real momentum here, there was real interest, and even Clowney himself made it clear that Dallas was a place he genuinely enjoyed, a place that meant something to him beyond just football. And when a player talks about the experience of playing under the lights, on prime time, on holidays like Thanksgiving and Christmas, you can tell that's not just PR talk. That's a player who felt the spotlight and embraced it. And Clowney didn't just stop there. He made it clear he still sees himself as a versatile piece, someone who can fit into multiple defensive schemes, whether it's a 4-3 or a 3-4, and in today's NFL, that kind of flexibility is incredibly valuable, especially for a team like the Cowboys that has been trying to evolve defensively. But here's where the story takes a turn, because despite all of that, despite the mutual familiarity, despite the fit, despite the experience, the Cowboys have not made a real move to bring him back, and that silence is louder than anything that's been said publicly. Now, when you listen to Jerry Jones talk about Clowney, it almost feels like he's walking a tightrope, because on one hand, he acknowledges the impact, the snaps, the production, the value that Clowney brought, but on the other hand, he's also hinting at something deeper, something more strategic, when he says you can't have it all. And that right there is the key, because what Jerry is really saying without saying it directly is that the Cowboys are prioritizing something else. They're betting on their younger talent. They're betting on internal development. And they're betting on the idea that what they already have can grow into something bigger. And that shift became even more noticeable after the hiring of Christian Parker, because before that move, the tone around Clowney was completely different. It was about bringing him back, about keeping continuity, about maintaining depth. But after that hire, suddenly the conversation changed to scheme fit, to evaluation, to hesitation. And when a team starts using those kinds of words, it usually means they've already made a decision. They're just not ready to say it outright. And that's why, as things stand right now, it doesn't feel like Clowney is part of the Cowboys' immediate plans, not unless something unexpected happens, like an injury or a sudden gap that needs to be filled quickly, because historically, Clowney is not the kind of player who rushes into a deal. He's patient, he waits, he signs later in the offseason, sometimes even closer to training camp, and that means this door isn't completely closed, but it's definitely not wide open either. It's more like slightly cracked, waiting for a very specific situation to push it open again. Now, shifting over to Wagner, this is where things get even more fascinating. Because if you just listen to the words coming out of the Cowboys organization, you would think there's real interest there, especially when you hear Brian Schottenheimer speak about him with so much respect, so much admiration, talking about his leadership, his competitiveness, his experience, and everything he brings to a locker room. But here's the thing. In the NFL, what teams say and what teams do are often two completely different realities, and in this case, the actions are telling a very different story. Because if the Cowboys truly wanted Wagner, if they saw him as a key piece to fix their linebacker situation, there is absolutely nothing stopping them from making that move right now. There are no major financial barriers, there's no compensation complication. And yet, here we are in April, and there has been no real push, no serious attempt, no concrete step towards signing him, and that tells you everything you need to know. Because this is a team that clearly has a need at linebacker. When you look at the current depth, it's not where it needs to be. It's not championship-level depth, And still, they're choosing not to act. And that decision speaks volumes. And part of that comes down to Wagner himself, because while he's still incredibly productive, still putting up strong tackle numbers, still showing that veteran instinct and football IQ that has defined his entire career, the game has changed. And the demands of the linebacker position have evolved, and coverage ability has become more important than ever. And that's where Wagner, at this stage of his career, starts to show limitations. And for a Cowboys defense that likely wants speed, versatility, and coverage skills in the middle of the field, that mismatch becomes a major factor, and it explains why there's admiration, but not action. Now, let's talk about Brandon Aubrey, because this situation is a completely different kind of story. This is not about hesitation, this is not about fit, this is about value, and how far the Cowboys are willing to go to secure it, because Aubrey has been nothing short of outstanding. He's been reliable, consistent, and in many ways one of the most dependable pieces on this roster, and when you have a kicker performing at that level, the conversation naturally shifts to long-term commitment. But that's where things get complicated. Because while Jerry Jones has made it clear that there are long-term plans, he's also been careful not to reveal too much, not to commit publicly, and that's because both sides understand what's at stake here. Aubrey is not just looking for a contract, he's looking to reset the market, to become the highest-paid kicker in the league. And from his perspective, that makes perfect sense. But from the Cowboys' perspective, it's about balance. It's about rewarding performance without completely disrupting the financial structure of the position. And that's why this negotiation feels like a slow burn rather than a quick deal. Because the Cowboys have leverage, they have the tender, they have future options like the franchise tag, and they don't need to rush into anything. But at the same time, they know what they have. They know how valuable Aubrey is, and eventually, this is a deal that likely gets done. It's just a matter of where that final number lands and how far both sides are willing to bend to meet in the middle. And finally, we get to Maxx Crosby, and this might be the most intriguing situation of them all, because it's not just about talent, it's about timing, leverage, and opportunity. And right now, all three of those things are working against the idea of a trade, because even though the Cowboys have shown interest in the past, even though the idea of adding a player like Crosby is incredibly appealing, the reality is that the window for that move, at least for now, appears to be closed. When you hear Jerry Jones talk about it, he's not completely shutting the door, but he's not opening it either. He's leaving it in that ambiguous space where anything is technically possible, but nothing is actively happening, and that's because the dynamics have shifted. Crosby is no longer pushing for a move. The Las Vegas Raiders are no longer under pressure to make a deal, and without that pressure, without that urgency, the entire situation loses momentum. And in the NFL, momentum is everything when it comes to trades, because once it's gone, it's incredibly difficult to recreate unless something significant changes, like a disappointing season, a shift in team direction, or a new wave of interest closer to the trade deadline. And that's why, if you're looking at this from a realistic perspective, this is not a move you should expect anytime soon. It's something that might resurface later, but for now, it's more of a storyline than an actual possibility. So, when you step back and look at the bigger picture, what you're seeing from the Cowboys right now is a team that is being very calculated, very selective, and very intentional with its decisions. They're not chasing every opportunity. They're not reacting emotionally. They're sticking to a plan, even if that plan means passing on big names, even if it means trusting younger players, and even if it means taking a risk on internal development. And whether that approach leads to success or frustration, that's the story that's going to unfold as the season gets closer, because right now, the Cowboys are sending a clear message, not through bold moves, but through quiet decisions, and sometimes those are the ones that matter the most.